Hello and welcome back. It's me, Valerie Monroe, and me, Bookwormy, and we're here today to read another part of Down the Swale. Are you going to ask them what they remembered about yesterday? Yesterday, if you remember, we had been reading a part where Brogden and his aunts had arrived at Sunset Island. And also, John met Fred and Nancy. Fred and Nancy were going to go build a nest somewhere on Sunset Island. And now Brogden is just about to tell John and Elaine what kind of danger he thinks Maggie's in. Oh boy, I wonder what's going to happen. I don't know. We're going to find out. And the only way we can find out is to R-E-A-D. That spells read. Thank you, Bookwormy. John, Brogden began, and his tone was serious. There isn't much time. Something dreadful is about to happen. Elaine patted his shoulder. Nothing so dreadful that a warm meal wouldn't fix, I'm sure. Let's all go inside and talk over a snack. Your Aunt Gladys looks like she could use a rest. Indeed, the flight had not agreed with Aunt Gladys. Her face had taken on a pale green pallor. I believe some chamomile tea will do the trick, she said. John and Elaine led them up the beach, past the torches, and into the house. Elaine set Aunt Gladys down on a fluffy couch pillow in the living room and fed her tiny spoonfuls of tea. And gradually the green coloring faded away, although she remained quite pale. John set 2 long dishes in front of Aunt Hazel and Brogden. Banana splits, he said with a smile. They were piled high with 3 flavors of ice cream, wet walnuts, whipped cream, hot fudge, and 2 cherries each. Oh, how heavenly, announced Aunt Hazel. Brogden agreed, but his mind was not on food. I need to tell you something about Maggie, he began. What about her? Elaine asked. Aunt Gladys had fallen asleep on the pillow beside her, tuckered out from all of the excitement. I think, no, I'm positive she's in danger. Oh, that's impossible, John replied. It's safe here. No one would ever suspect that she's in Lake Wahakmo. But then Elaine touched John's arm gently. Unfortunately, we can't rule out the possibility that it could be true. Ruthless people will stop at nothing to capture Maggie, even if it means traveling halfway across the world to track her down. Tell us, Brogden, she said. Have you heard something? Worse than that, he said, and launched into everything he knew so far. Mackie and Sim's plans, their moving van, the weapons, and the biggest evidence of all, the picture of Maggie that they had. This is not good, John said, banging his fist onto the coffee table, and then he turned to Elaine. So what do we do about it? We must act quickly, she replied. From downstairs came the familiar humming sound. Okay, John said, let's go and feed Maggie and see if we can come up with a plan. I'll stay here with Aunt Gladys, Elaine suggested. I don't want her to be frightened if she wakes up in unfamiliar surroundings. John carried Brogden in one arm and Aunt Hazel in the other as they made their way down to the basement. As they stood in front of the secret door, they could hear splashes. John removed the key from around his neck and opened the padlock. Brogden had to restrain himself from pushing past him as they descended down the staircase, and he was so excited to see Maggie again. Aunt Hazel brought up the rear, muttering to herself about how interesting everything was. When Maggie caught sight of Brogden, she flipped into a series of somersaults before swimming to the front of the tank, where she flashed him a toothy grin. When Brogden had been back at home with his aunts, he'd often closed his eyes and tried to recall what Maggie had looked like. Now she appeared even more majestic than he remembered. Her scales cast pinpoints of light in all directions. Her neck stretched out like a swaying tree, and her powerful muscles rippled as she moved through the water. Hello, Maggie, he said, and pressed his face against the glass. Maggie sank below the surface and pressed her nostrils onto the other side. When Brogden blinked, she blinked back. They stayed that way, looking at each other for a long while. Meanwhile, Aunt Hazel gasped out a string of adjectives. Splendid, superb, regal, dazzling. Such a remarkable, resplendent creature, and right here in our own Lake Wahakmo. Oh, I am so perfectly pleased to be standing here at this very moment. Now, I myself have studied flora and fauna for many years, but never have I seen a creature so sublime, so grand. John pressed one of the orangey pellets into Aunt Hazel's hand. Go ahead, he encouraged. Give her a treat. He lifted her high enough to toss it over the top of the tank. Maggie snatched it up into her wide mouth. Yum, she hummed appreciatively. Yum. Oh, what a dear, exclaimed Aunt Hazel. May I give her some more? Of course, replied John. She'll love that. He held her up so that she could toss in 4 more pellets. With each yum, Aunt Hazel fell more and more in love with Maggie. To her great delight, after the last pellet was eaten, Maggie performed a series of backward twists and flips. She then glanced shyly at Aunt Hazel, who clapped her hands with glee. Bravo, Maggie! Bravo, Maggie! This is how she looks. Bravo, Maggie! Bravo! She exclaimed, and then battered John with a series of nonstop questions. How old is Maggie? How long is she? How much does she weigh? How many pellets does she eat each day? How often does she exercise? On and on and on. John answered each one to the best of his ability, but explained that Elaine was the real expert. I can't believe someone would want to harm her, Aunt Hazel cried out indignantly. She's a darling, and she's just a baby. Why don't we discuss this upstairs, John suggested. Not in front of Maggie. Oh, sorry, of course, Aunt Hazel said. She and Brogden followed him back up the stairs to the living room, where Elaine sat with books spread out across the coffee table and a small pair of horn-rimmed reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Elaine put her finger to her lips and pointed to Aunt Gladys, who was sleeping peacefully and snoring lightly. I think I've figured out who Maggie and Simp are, she whispered. I've been doing some research. She motioned to the book she'd been reading. Her eyes peered through her glasses as she scanned the page. Let's see. Decades ago, there were 2 men who were sailing in a boat together in Loch Morar. A creature rose out of the water behind their boat and bumped into the side of it. Says here that the impact was so strong that a kettle of water on the boat fell to the floor. Apparently, one of the men tried to fend the creature off with an oar, and the other fired at it with a rifle. It had to be Morag, Maggie's mother. She paused. And here, listen to this. It's implied that both men were seen as liars, that nobody believed their story, and that they were very bitter about the whole experience. She continued reading silently for a moment and then looked up and removed her glasses. My guess is that Mackie and Simp are relatives of these men, and they're out to prove that their ancestors really did see Morag. One thing really troubles me, though. Those men in that boat assumed that Morag was dangerous. When she bumped into them, did they ever stop to consider the fact that it was simply an accident, or that she might have been lost and was trying to approach them for help? She shook her head in disgust. At any rate, Mackie and Simp cannot find out where Maggie is. I do believe they mean to harm her. She put her head in her hands. What to do? What to do? She murmured anxiously, tapping her nails on the table. And then Brogden said, I think I have a plan. And that actually brings us up to chapter 14, which we will read tomorrow. Hello. I have a question. Yes. What do you think Brogden's plan is? I know because I wrote the book, but I can't tell you. You have to wait till tomorrow when I read it. Okay, so let's continue tomorrow and find out what the plan is to keep Maggie safe from those hunters, Mackie and Simp. Sounds like a plan. And we'll plan to find out what Brogden's plan is. That's a plan, man. Well, we'll hope to see you tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye. Come back